To understand the experiences of black men on psych wards, you need to understand race was invented. In her book, What White People Can Do Next, From Allyship to Coalition, Emma Dabry discusses how the invention of race was a product of colonialism, particularly how before 1661, the very idea of white and black was non-existent, and it wasn't until the 19th century that we were introduced to scientific racism, with white people at the top of the hierarchy and black people at the bottom, and other racial groups in between. Of course, it is a very complex problem, articulated by scholars including Carl Linnaeus and Johann Blumenbach, and their articulations of race science setting the terms for what is now white and black, part of what we now call anti-blackness, from over-policing to the construction of laws, weaving threads through gender, place, sexuality, class and more. But the treatment of black men in mental health institutions is racist at its core, and those engaged in enslaving Africans consider themselves to be good Christians, but also believing Africans to be uncivilized. Here we delve into racist history of divide and rule, which in part built dynasties of white wealth where the crimes of yesterday are still impacting black people's mental health. In 1970, black American psychiatrist Chester Pierce coined the now famous term microaggression to give voice to the white slaughter and repression of black minds. He called racism a contagious disease. Now in 2021, amid the language of COVID-19, institutional whiteness dissects black minds at the seams, or the truth of the matter sees me 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act, at greater risk of being sectioned because I am black, 5.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with psychosis. Are we actually mad? Or is this the work of whiteness? 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with mania, while some studies claim the chances are 9 times greater for black Caribbean men in Britain to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, in a UK that still politely says we are all the same, all whitely, where the term white is a synonym for not for the life of me. Living while black in a world made for whiteness's zeal, racism meanders through black minds, revisiting the wheel of time that allows us to see the nooses colonizers wrapped around our necks. In this town of shoe and boot, talk of bad apples sees no accountability for how the roots wither in dead soil, where the rules back whitely sins. Black minds toiled by war and pieces of what could have been. Growing up, I was told to smile more, in a world where black is treated as a stand-in for poor, unlawful, thief, murderer, rapist, violent, stereotypes with which we are to remain compliant, in the tint of the holy book, colonialism and God. For many black racialized men seeing police squads, frequently these are symbols for hell, not help, where going to the authorities is the final straw after all else, whether it is the police or other service providers meaning well. Why call it police brutality rather than genocide, like the school to prison pipeline, because this plantation is a school. Black racialized boys flipped on their backs like beetles, where whiteness placed both Jesus and Judas preying on the diaspora, betrayed by Brutus, for we are not our ancestors' wildest dreams. Now blamed for hesitancy to the coronavirus vaccines, in spite of histories of white Western colonial science, used to keep black and brown people docile and compliant, where the wages of whiteness violently flex, as psych wards act as extensions of the prison industrial complex. Mental health services perpetuate white privilege, and for me to say this is to be treated as primitive, where white emotions and feelings are centered ahead of black pain, and misremembered contemporary histories present our questions to white authority as black male aggression, deflecting from the problem of white racism. They tell us to stop making everything about race. But you see, everything is about race when you widen your gaze. It's kind of funny because race is something white people invented, and since the 1660s it's only been developed and fermented. They keep telling me, I hear you, but I think you should go read about the racial schema. In the words of psychiatrist Frantz Fanon, and the stories of colonialism, disease and famine. Today there are windrush stories of black racialized men interlocked with how society condemns the black masculine and how you tell us we're on a journey of learning. But our minds are tired because our communities are burning. We watch the white world building its imperial economies. Yet this comes from the overwork of black minds in vast quantities. But you still claim that you gave the black race democracy while capitalism kills us disproportionately, locking us in poverty, stopped Section 60 and imprisoning us astronomically. This poem is for the people who are murdered by the fires at Grenfell and for the black racialized men falsely imprisoned left to rot in a cell. Patriarchy is our enemy, but we reproduce it subliminally. While my maleness has qualifiers because I have a disability, my mental wellness has qualifiers that largely come from difficulties as I'm neurodivergent. But black communities have yet to have a conversation about neurodivergency. Patriarchy and ableism contribute to my mental ills where I'm often pretending to be someone else as masking kills. Here I see many black racialized men's minds taken and many more minds overlooked, subsequently forsaken. Think how black mental health exists intersectionally across disability, sexuality, gender divergence, non-binary. Think also how numbers of gay black men keep their sexuality within. Ask why many of their lives are seen and treated as synonymous with sin. Your faith is not inclusive if you use it to hate. Exorcise those bygone demons. Ostracizing swathes of black men. You stand there calling them heathens. How can you say Black Lives Matter if you do not care if some of us choke? But you keep calling yourselves woke, what a joke. Some days I wake up thinking nobody would care if I stopped breathing. As being neurodivergent or black, I struggle to find meaning in a world that has normalized oppression, abuse and pain. The lives of those we know, but also the people history writes without names. Education reduces students to number IDs, and so-called autism experts claim autistic people lack empathy, where these experts were thought to be exemplary, claim they want to use the DNA of autistic people to enhance wellness, but the Spectrum 10K project speaks to us a serious societal regress, back to the days of eugenics, still today working systematically, where there are significant crossovers between neurodivergence and LGBT+. So Spectrum 10K has numbers of people that sit on the CRISS-CROSS, including being autistic while black, autistic while non-binary, autistic while trans, and intersections of black racialized men are stepped on in the white man's land for us, living on the train tracks of social justice issues, from violence against trans people to ableism and domestic abuse. Now, suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50, and as a black racialized man, lots of my feelings come from history. Frantz Fanon describes how colonialism distorted black people's understanding of blackness, contorted with the white gaze and racist fabrications of savagery, inferiority, and the politics of assimilation is rooted in the self-hatred our ancestors experienced. With each generation, it shifts and changes its appearance, while colonialism should be positioned as the history of white people. It is the hand that helped the subservient turtle off its back, a scrambling beetle, because enslavement is not black history. We were subject to it, and that legacy can be seen in the 21st century's mental health crisis. In this post-traumatic slave syndrome, we are told enslavement happened so long ago. People that were captured, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. Not 4 centuries, then freed with no help, the wrongs of yesterday, sustained today, with the trauma allowed to continue tomorrow. Adapt to survive, coloured by history that I see through how some black boys are denigrated by their relatives, a repetitive trauma response, the long-reaching sedative of white masters in the gaze of cotton fields and sugar mills, masters taking an interest in young black boys doing well, where white masters and mistresses would actively sell them, ripping bodies away from their mothers' arms, forcing them to work on other plantations, victimized by social harm. that in the 1970s many black boys, including some doing too well, were sent to special schools for the educationally subnormal? How does being black in Britain impact stress and a black person's ability to live amid this COVID mess? The ability to fight disease and operate your immune system, how racism is habitual and socialised into our being. I don't believe you can solve this mental health crisis just with pills. We're fighting over 400 years of historical ills. Much of what we need is in social justice, equity and lasting change, as we are working with lots of mental health problems that range from panic and anxiety to psychosis and depression. There is also white supremacy, a system designed for the oppression of all racialized others, designed to gaslight, maim, harm and kill us, from school to prison pipelines and the NHS to the illegal deportations of the Windrush.